we'll be going over IRS Form 945X, adjusted annual return of withheld federal income tax or a claim for refund. So this is a 2-page tax form. We'll go over it in just a moment, but I wanted to outline the situations where you would use this form. So the IRS instructions specifically state that you would use this to correct administrative errors that were made on your original 945, which is the annual return of withheld federal income tax. You would use a separate form 945X for each year that you're correcting. So if you go back into your records and you find 2 tax years, you would need to complete this form 2 separate times, 1 time for each year. There are 2 pages, as I mentioned, and it's broken down into 4 parts. So part 1 is the process that you would select. We'll get into that in a moment. Part 2 is the calculations. Part 3 is the explanation, the written explanation. And then part 4 is the signature field. So let's go ahead and go to the top. We're going to briefly go over the taxpayer information. So at the very top, we're going to enter the employer identification number. So in this case, John Doe is entering his firm's EIN. Even if you're a sole entrepreneur or a sole proprietor, you would enter an employer identification number that ties this to the original return. So do not use your social security number, use your EIN instead. Below that, we would enter the name of the company, not necessarily the trade name, but in this case, we put in Doe Enterprises, also doing business as Doe and Associates, and then we've got this address here. According to the IRS instructions, this is a form that you can file even if you've changed addresses and then you file this form with your updated address, then the IRS will update your records automatically. You don't need to file IRS Form 8822, or in this case, IRS Form 8822B to report the change in your business address. On the right-hand side of the form, we're going to enter the tax year of the return that we're correcting. So in this case, 4-digit number of 2022. And then we're going to enter the date that you discovered the error. So let's imagine that we discovered this error on October 1st of 2024. While there isn't really a due date, the IRS will take this into consideration when evaluating whether or not you're going to be charged interest or if you're going to be expected to pay interest. Generally speaking, if the IRS believes that you applied due diligence and you reported this promptly, then you should be able to, if you owed money, then you should be able to pay the difference. The IRS may not charge interest if this is, because this is an administrative error. So let's go through the form. In part 1, we're going to select one of 2 processes. So if you owed money or if you have money that's owed to you, you can select option 1, which simply means that you're going to adjust the original return. So if you filed IRS Form 945 for tax year 2022, this would adjust that form directly. So you have to use this if you underreported amounts, meaning that you now have a bigger tax liability, but you send in the money that you originally reported. We'll kind of get into this in a moment. It's a little bit opposite of what you would think, so it's not the most intuitive concept. But basically, if you check this box, then you are directly adjusting the tax return in question. So you would check this if you underreported, if you overreported, or if you are correcting both underreported and overreported amounts on the form. And if this amount ends up being a credit, then it would only be applied as a credit to the tax period for which you're filing the form. Part 2, you would check this box only if you over-reported and now you're trying to file a claim for a refund or abatement of the amount that is the difference. So let's get into part 2 where we can make this a little bit more clear. So basically what this means is there are 3 columns. Column 1 is the total corrected amount. Total 2 is the original amount reported, and then column 3 is the difference. And so what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to point out a situation where this is going to result in an abatement or a refund, and then we'll talk about the opposite scenario. So in column 1, let's imagine that we originally reported $10,000 of tax withholding and $5,000 of backup withholding. That's what we originally reported, and when we filed the tax return, we paid that money. But then when we did an internal audit, we found out that we actually reported the wrong amount. We should have been reporting $8,000 because that's the actual amount that we withheld. And then backup withholding, we originally withheld $4,000. So we subtract the difference, and this results in a minus $2,000 for total federal income tax withheld, plus another minus $1,000 in backup withholding, for a total of negative $3,000. So because this amount is less than 0, then we go back to either line 1, which says we would apply a credit to the Form 945 for that tax year for that $3,000. If you check line 2, that means we're filing a claim, and we're doing this with the expectation that there are no future adjustments. This is going to zero out everything. So if this confuses you, join the club. It does sound intuitively backwards until you kind of understand the rationale. So when you originally reported an amount, let's just say we reported $10,000, but we actually, and that's how much we remitted to the IRS. But let's imagine that we actually collected $12,000. That means that we owe the IRS the money. So we need to pony up. If we reported $10,000, but we actually collected $12,000, then $2,000 of that belongs to the federal government. And then, that's kind of this scenario B situation. The first time we walked through this, we actually had reported federal income tax and we paid that based on our first calculation that we withheld $10,000, but then we went back, looked at the books, and we discovered that we only withheld $8,000 of taxes from our employees. That means we shouldn't have paid that $10,000. So this is a little bit backwards, but it does make sense the way this form kind of walks you through it. So I reverted this back to the second scenario where if line 5 amount is more than 0, this is how much you owe. And again, walking through this means we reported $10,000 and we gave $10,000 to the IRS. When we went and did our internal audit, we actually collected $12,000, but we only paid the IRS $10,000, so we still owe them another $2,000. And then the same calculation on the backup withholding means that our total is $3,000 of federal income tax that we withheld that we owe the federal government. So, and then this is the amount that you would pay when you file the return. So there are additional details in our article about how you can make that tax payment, so on and so forth. So we'll put a link in the show notes. At the top of page 2, we're going to put in the name of the company, the EIN, and the calendar year up here again. This line 6 is a box that you would check if you actually had underreported and overreported amounts. So let's go back up here for a moment, and let's just say that we actually underreported the we underreported the federal income tax withheld because some of it we classified as backup withholding. So in this case, this ends up being a wash, and we're just reporting this administrative change. So in this scenario, we reported $10,000 of federal income tax that was withheld when we actually should have reported $12,000. With the backup withholding, we reported $12,000 more than we actually collected. But since the total for each of those was $22,000, the difference on the top is $2,000. That cancels out with the difference of minus $2,000 on the bottom, and that results in a net zero amount. So in this situation, you would check box 6, and then you would provide a written explanation. So this basically is kind of based on something that I found in the form instructions, where we found this during an internal audit where there was a discrepancy withheld. We reported X amount here. We should have reported X amount, and then this filing reflects the actual taxes withheld. So you can break this down into a paragraph, or you can kind of do line 3, $10,000, line 4, $12,000 difference, blankety blank. So you can do either or. At the bottom, you're going to sign as the officer that's authorized by the company. And then at the bottom is the tax preparer information. Their declaration is simply based on the information that you've given them. So James Smith is taking this information from John Doe, says, hey, I believe that this is true based on the information that I have, whereas John Doe is actually making this declaration under the penalty of perjury that, to the best of his knowledge, it's true, complete, and correct. So, if you were looking to use this form to abate a penalty that the IRS imposed, you would not use IRS Form 945X. Instead, you would use IRS Form 843, which is the request for abatement. There are also certain instances where you may use one of the other tax forms based on your taxpayer situation and how you found that mistake. We do go into a little bit more detail in our article, so please feel free to check that out. That's all we have for this article, for this form. It's fairly straightforward, except for part 2 that might seem a little confusing until you can kind of get your arms around it. So rewatch this section if you need to. But we'll put links in the show notes to articles and videos related to forms that were mentioned here. So if you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. And if you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, or if there's another topic you'd like to see covered in an upcoming video, please hit me up in the comments section. Thank you very much and have a great day.